Standard form is what we're going to look at in this video. It's split into 8 parts. We're going to start off by looking at, well, how do you write something like this as an ordinary number? And then move on to looking at, well, how do you put a number into standard form? And then look at the same thing with numbers with trailing zeros, decimals with leading zeros, and then look at numbers where we have a power of 10 that's not in standard form. And then again, same thing with whole numbers and negative powers, and then multiplying two numbers and then writing the answer in standard form, and then dividing numbers like this and writing the answer in standard form. So the way my videos work, I'm going to do the example on the left, which is I do. You are then going to press pause and have a go at the example on the right, which is you do. And at the bottom of the slide, you can see the type of example this is. So I'm going to start off by looking at ordinary numbers. So when you multiply by 10, you just hop the decimal. So if I had 15 times 10, now 15 is the same as writing 15.0. You just hop the decimal once and the answer becomes 10. So when you multiply by 10 squared, you just hop the decimal twice. So the answer becomes 1500. Well, that's 150. That's 1500. Okay, so equally speaking, if you times by 3, you just hop the decimal 3 times. So the answer here is 1500 because you hop the decimal twice. So hopefully you've pressed pause now to go at the example on the right. So 18 can be written as 18.0, and then we hop the decimal 1, 2, 3 times, so the decimal ends up there, and the answer is 18000. Okay, so that is the final answer. You don't need the decimal at the end. Moving on, we now have the exact same thing, but the number already a decimal in there for us. So given the decimals there, we need to hop it 4 times. So we have 5.037. We hop that 1, 2, 3, 4. So that becomes 50370. Okay, that is the final answer there. So again, looking at the example on the right, hopefully you've pressed pause and had a go. We hop the decimal once, twice, 3 times. So the decimal then ends up there. So that's 6750. Okay, you don't need the decimal at the end again, but that is your final answer. Now, when you have negative indices, you do the exact same thing, but instead of hopping to the right, you hop to the left. So we have 15. Remember, the decimal in 15 is there. We're going to hop 2 to the left. We go 1, 2. So the decimal ends up there. So the final answer then becomes 0.15. Okay, that is the final answer. And on the right, again, we're now going to hop to the left. So 17. Remember, the decimal is there. We hop 1 to the left. So the answer becomes 1.7. One more question on this. So here we have 1.42. If I hop the decimal twice, I have 1, 2. So the decimal ends up here. So my final answer is 0.0142. And again, on the right, we have 52.47. And we are hopping 3 times. So that's 1, 2, 3. So the decimal ends up here. And we can write the final answer as 0.05247. So here's some practice questions. Press pause and have a go. Here are the answers. Mark your work. Now moving on to standard form. What is standard form? So standard form is written in the form A times 10 to the power of B. Okay, so if you're wondering what that is, so A is a number between 1 and 9. Okay, A can be any number between 1 and 9, and you don't need to worry too much about this. It's just times 10 to the power of something. So if you look on the left, the first one is in standard form because we have 1 times 10 to the power of 3. The second one is in standard form. The third one is not in standard form because A, remember, has to be between 1 and 9. It can be 1 and it can be 9, but it can't be 10. Okay. The next one is standard form because, again, this number here is between 1 and 9. Again, this number here is between 1 and 9. That's fine as well. But this one isn't because this number here is not between 1 and 9. Okay. And how do we turn these into standard form? So, for example, this one here. Now, to turn this into standard form, you need to hop the decimal twice, and then it becomes 1.754. Okay, so that's the whole idea behind how you turn something into standard form. So same with the 10, the decimal's there. We need to hop it. So you need to be thinking about how do you hop the decimals to get your answer. So moving on, write the following in standard form. Now remember, in order for this to be standard form, it needs to be between 1 and 9. So what we can do is move this decimal here. So that then becomes 1.05. Now, because we moved the decimal 1 to the left, we are going to times this by 10. So that is my final answer. So this 1 is how many times we hopped. So we hopped once. And if you check your final answer now, if I was to solve this if you did 1.05 times 10, you would end up with the same answer. Okay, so again, if I look on the right, we have this 91.3. I can write that as 9.13 in standard form. So I hopped once to the left, and because I hopped once, the power then becomes 1. So moving on, again with this one, I need to write this in standard form, so that would then become 8.234. So that means I hop the decimal twice. Because I hop the decimal twice, the power then becomes 2. And again, here, we're going to hop the decimal twice because the first digit needs to be between 1 and 9. And now it is because it's 2.76, which is between 1 and 9. And because I hop twice, the power becomes 2. Moving on, again, with this one, I need the first digit to be between 1 and 9, so I can just do that. And now I just count how many times I hopped, which is 3 times, so I just times it by 10 to the power of 3. Again, the same thing here. Hopefully you've pressed pause and had a go. Just hop the decimal, and then the power is the number of hops. So here's some practice questions. Press pause and have a go. Here's the answers, mark your work. Now moving on, we now have whole numbers. Now the only difference now between this and whole numbers is decimal numbers is that the decimal's not there. But remember, the decimal in whole numbers is right at the end. So there is a decimal there. So to write this in standard form, we can write it as 1.7. So you hop the decimal once, which means the power of 10 is going to be 1. Again, remember with 25, the decimal is there, so that can be written as 2.5 times 10 to the power of 1 in standard form. So again, to write this in standard form, we just hop the decimal twice, so that's 7.49. And because we hopped twice, that's the answer there. And again, hopefully press pause and had a go at this. So again, with this, you would hop the decimal twice, and that is your answer there. And again, with this one, we hop the decimal 3 times now, so that becomes 1.4042. And because you hopped 3 times, the power becomes 3. And again, hopefully you've pressed pause and had a go at this too. The exact same thing here. So here's some practice questions. Press pause and have a go. Here are the answers. Now, moving on. Now, when you have trailing zeros, you don't necessarily need to include the zeros in your final answer. So for example, the decimal is there. We hop 1, 2. We can write this as 1.70 times 10 to the power of 2, but you don't need to write this 0 in. You can leave that, so I can just rub that off, okay? So again, hopefully you've had a go at this one. So this would become, we hop the decimal 1, 2 to get it into standard form, which is now 2.5 times 10 to the power of 2. And with this one, it'll just be, again, you hop the decimals twice. You don't need to write the trailing zeros, so we can just write that as that. It's not wrong to write them in, so you could write this as 1.00 times 10 squared, but you don't need to write them in, okay? So with this one, you can write the answer as, well, how many times do you hop the decimal? 1, 2, so that becomes 2 times 10 to the power of 2. And moving on. Now with this one, taking a bit of care, we want to write in standard form. So first thing we do is we write it as 1.02. The only zeros you don't include are the trailing zeros, okay? They're the zeros at the end. You still keep the 0 in, okay? And how many times did you hop? 4 times. And again, same with this. We hopped 3 times. So here's some practice questions. Press pause and have a go. Here are the answers. And now we have a decimal number with a 0 at the front. So in order to make this in standard form, remember the number has to be between 1 and 9. So in order to do that, I can just move the decimal there. So that becomes 7.5 times 10 to the power of. Now, this is a bit different because we hopped to the right this time. It becomes a negative power, okay? So you still count the number of hops. There's 1 hop, but it's negative. Because if you solved this question here, the -1 just means hop the decimal back and you end up with the same answer. So again, you hop the decimal to get it into standard form, which is now 6.3, that's fine. How many times did you hop? Once, but because you hopped to the right, we're going to put a negative there. So again, same thing here, to get it in standard form, that'll become 7 times 10 to the power of -1. And again, here you'd have to hop once, so that'll be 10. 5 times 10 to the -1. And same thing here, we have 6.3 now, times that by 10 to the power of how many hops? 3. And again, 3 hops here, so that's 7.5 times 10 to the power of -3. So looking at this one, again, just being careful with the zeros, it can be a bit confusing. So if I hop this twice, that is now 6.03. Okay, that is between 1 and 9. How many times did I hop twice? So -2 there. And here we hop 3 times, again, being careful with the zeros. So that's 2.001 times 10 to the power of -3. Here's some practice questions. Press pause and have a go. Here are the answers. And now, with this question, it's interesting. It's saying write the following in standard form. So here you have to really carefully look at the question. It is not given in standard form. Remember, in standard form, this number has to be between 1 and 9. It can be 1 and it can be 9, but at the minute it's 17. Now, how do we fix that? Well, we just need to hop the decimal 1 back. So if I divide this by 10, so that'll just become 1.75 times, well, in fact, there's an even better way for me to show you this to start with. If you solve this, that just becomes 17500, because the times 10 to the power of 2 just means hop the decimal twice to the right. So in fact, the answer is 1750 if you solve this. Now, how do you put 1750 in standard form? Well, you just hop the decimal 1, 2, 3 back, so that becomes 1.75 times 10 to the power of 3. So that is your final answer. Now, a nice little trick in doing this is immediately when you looked at this question, you could say, well, actually, I need to move this decimal here. So I divide by 10, and you do the opposite on the other side. Because we hopped 1 to the left, we then times this by 10 to the power of 1. And then if you just do 10 squared times 10, that gives you 10 cubed. So for example, hopefully press pause and I'll do that example on the right. The way I'm going to do this is, well, I can see immediately, I need to hop that there, which means I divide by 10, which means I do the opposite on this side. Okay, so my answer then becomes 8.12, and when you multiply two numbers like this together, you just add the powers, so that just becomes 10 to the power of 8. So moving on to this one, I'm going to hop the decimal 1, 2 to the right, which gives me 3.5. So because I times this by 10 squared, I'm going to have to do the opposite here. I'm going to have to divide this by 10 squared. And now when you divide indices, you subtract them. So this will then become 10 to the power of minus 5. Now that can be a bit confusing. So what's happened here is you've done that divided by that. Okay, and then if you do minus 3, minus 2, that gives you minus 5. This is dividing indices. It might be worth watching my video on index notation. So moving on to this one. Again, first thing is straight away, I'm just going to hop the decimal there to get it into standard form. And now what have I done? Well, I've times this by 10, so I'll do the opposite on the other side. So then I divide it by 10. And again, I can include the power there to make my life easier. So if I just did that, and then 10 minus 10 would just, the powers would just cancel out to become 0. So I can just write my final answer as 4.2 times 10 to the power of 0 in standard form. So moving on, we now have write the following in standard form. So again, the exact same thing. I hop 1 to the right, which means I times by 10. So I'll do the opposite on this side. I divide by 10. And I'll keep the power there because it makes our life easier. So that's going to be 7.5. Now, that becomes 10 squared divided by 10 to the power of 1. You just subtract the indices. So 2 minus 1 gives us 1. So that is our final answer there. Now again here, we hop 1 to the right. So that gives us 8.25. So because we times this by 10, we do the opposite here. We divide it by 10. Because there was one hop, the power is 1. So we then have 10 cubed divided by 10 to the power of 1. Subtract 3 and 1, and you get times 10 squared. So here's some practice questions. Press pause and have a go. Here are the answers. Now, moving on, again, it says write in standard form. So remember, with whole numbers, the decimal is there at the end. We move the decimal 1 to the left, which means I divide by 10, which means I times this side by 10. So that then becomes 2.3. And when you multiply powers, so that's 10 to the power of 4 times 10 to the power of 1, you just add them together. And again, hopefully you've pressed pause and had to go here. So here we are dividing by 10, so I'll do the opposite on this side. That's 7.6 times 10 to the power of 4, because you add the 3 and the 1 together. So moving on, to write this in standard form, I'm going to hop 1, 2, 3 times to the left. So because I hopped 3 times to the left, which was dividing by 10 cubed, I'm going to multiply this side by 10 cubed. And remember, when you multiply powers, so that's 10 cubed times 10 squared, you just add them together. So that's 3 plus 2, which gives me 5. And again, hopefully on this side, you did the same thing. You divide this by 10 squared because there's 2 hops. So I'll do the opposite on this side. I times it by 10 squared, which gives me 2.67 times 10 to the power of 5, because you can add the 3 and the 2 together. So looking at this one here, I'm going to hop 1, 2, 3. So that's divide by 10 cubed. So on this side, I'm going to do times 10 cubed, so that's 1.045. Now if I do minus 3 plus 3, that just becomes a 0. So I can just write that as that. So it says write the following in standard form. So we have same thing here. So first thing, I'm going to hop to get me that. I've hopped by dividing it by 10 squared. So I times this side by 10 squared. Now careful here, it's minus 1 plus 2. So that just becomes 10. And moving on. So here's some practice questions. Press pause and have a go. Here are the answers. And finally, we're looking at multiplication and then division. So in terms of a question like this, the way I like to do it is just do the numbers first. So you can rewrite this like this. Okay, so now if you do 5 times 3, that's 15. If you do 10 to the power of 6 times 10 to the power of 2, that's 10 to the power of 8. And now it's not in standard form yet. Remember, in standard form, this part has to be between 1 and 9. So I hop the decimal 1 to the left, which means I divide this by 10. So I times this side by 10. So that becomes 1.5 times 10 to the power of 9 is my final answer. So again, hopefully you've pressed pause and had a go at this. So you can do 3 times 4 times 10 to the power of 5 times 10 to the power of 2. That gives you 12 times 10 to the power of 7. And it's not in standard form yet. So if I hop 1 to the left by dividing by 10, I must times by 10 here. So that's 1.2 times 10 to the power of 8. So looking at this one, again, we'll do this one in the same order. So we have 4 times 9, which is 36. I'm just being a bit careful here. It's a negative, so 3 plus minus 2 will give you 10 to the power of 1. And if I hop 1 to the left by dividing by 10, I have to times by 10 here. So my final answer is 3.6 times 10 squared. And again, hopefully you've pressed pause and had a go at this example here. So that will give me 7 times 5 is 35. And minus 3 plus 5 would give you squared there. And then again, to get it into standard form, divide this side by 10 times this side by 10 to do the opposite there. So that is times 10 cubed. So here's some practice questions. Press pause and have a go. Here are the answers. And finally, we are now going to be looking at division. So with division, I tend to write it as a fraction. It makes life a bit easier. So I would write this as this, and then I would treat them as two separate things. So first I would do this. So 25 divided by 5, that just becomes 5 at the top. So we're then left with this, okay? And when you're dividing indices, you're just subtracting them. So that just becomes 5 times 10 to the power of 1. And that's already in standard form, so we don't need to do anything. So again, looking at the one on the right, hopefully you have pressed pause and had a go. And again, with this one, first we're going to deal with this. So 40 into 4 is 10 times, and we're left with this here. So I'm just going to write that again. So that's 10 to the power of 7 divided by 10 to the power of 3. And that's just going to become 10 to the power of 4. And it's not in standard form yet, because this number here has to be between 1 and 9. So I'm just going to hop the decimal 1 to the left by dividing by 10. So on this side I times by 10. So the answer is 1 times 10 to the power of 5. Also looking at this one here, so we have 20 times 10 to the power of 6 divided by 5 times 10 to the power of 8. Now if you do 20 divided by 5, that's 4. And then we're left with that side there. Now this 6 take away 2, just being a bit careful here, gives us a negative 2. Okay, and that is our final answer. It's already in standard form. So 36 times 10 to the power of 5 divided by 6 times 10 to the power of minus 2. So 6 into 36 is 6 times, and then we just have that take away that. Now being careful here, we are doing 5 take away negative 2. Okay, these two negatives become a positive. So that becomes 10 to the power of 7, and that's already in standard form. So here's some practice questions for you to have a go at. Press pause and have a go. Here are the answers. Now, if you would like a full worksheet on this, I have linked it down in the comments below. And if you found this video useful, I've got loads of other content like this over on my channel. Do check it out.